And welcome back to the Ultra Running Guys. You got Jeremy Reynolds and Jeff Winchester of the Ultra Running Guys. And the reason that we're here is to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey. And if it's your first time here, welcome. We appreciate you so much. And if you're coming back, your family, you guys know how much we love you. Standard ask. If you're finding the value, do the subscription, reviews, tell all your friends, all that good stuff. But here's the deal. A few months back, we realized that part of taking your next step in your journey is figuring out what that step looks like. So we started these race spotlight series so we could hear from the race directors themselves about the races they love and everything that you should know if you're considering it. And I'm excited about tonight because of two things. One, this is a race that covers a historic part of the country, and you're going to hear all about some great stuff. But two, we've got an absolute legend of the sport who's putting it on. So that is a treat in itself. But Jeff, tell us what we're covering tonight.
It's unnerving. I'm like somewhat geeking out about it, but I'm going to stay focused to stay on the topic of what we're talking about tonight.
Let's do it.
So yeah, today we are talking about the Route 66 Ultra Run. The race is like taking a journey through classic Americana is how the website describes it. And if you've been on Route 66, you know that to be true. So covering 140 miles, this race follows the longest remaining unbroken stretch of Route 66 in Arizona. The Ultra Run is held on the second weekend of November and takes place from Saturday to a Monday. So it's a Saturday and a Monday end, and the race has a 60-hour cutoff. That's it, because I'm ready to get into it. So looking forward to talking today with our good new friend, Marshall Ulrich. Marshall, thank you. It is an honor. Welcome to the show.
Well, and thank you very much for having me. It's a delight to be on here, and it's something that is, everybody needs to know about races. And so I think you guys have hit the spot with this, and so I hope people enjoy the podcast.
We appreciate that. We're excited. And if you're listening or watching, chances are you know the name Marshall Ulrich, and it's bringing up all kinds of memories. If you've read Born to Run, there's all kinds of books. You have books of your own. We could probably just talk forever about you. But if you don't know the name, please go Google, do yourself a favor. And so that way you appreciate who we're talking to. But Marshall, this is a unique race. We want to understand, why you're excited about it and some different things. But before we get into kind of the logistics and what sets it apart, I do have a question for you. As the race director, what is your favorite thing about the Route 66 Ultra Run?
Well, I think you touched on it just briefly. It's the history of it that is steeped way back to 1928 when the Bunyan Derbyers, started right down here at the Colorado River and ran all the way through Arizona on Route 66, the original Route 66. Not all of that race was put on Route 66, but what people will be doing is they will be following in the same footsteps, the same route as what it was back in 1928, which is an extraordinary thing. So I'm very much into the history of ultra running and some of the characters and things. And so we try and weave as much of that as we can as possible in the race itself, to the point where it's a historic route, and historically it was designated again as a historic route back in the 1980s. And there's Angel Delgadillo, who was behind that, and Seligman, where our race starts, and then you run 140 miles to Topock 66. Angel now, or he will be 97 years old, and he starts the race for us.
Wow.
So he's the one who started it all, and it spread from Arizona all across the U.S. So that's the history of Route 66 also. So it goes way beyond that. Plus you've got, all sorts of little things, tidbits like, the movie Cars, the cartoon Cars is all about this route and the story of it. The first one tells the story of it, how Route 66 bypassed all these ma and posh shops. So that's woven in. And then there's Grapes of Wrath, the Okies crossing Arizona. So it's historic and very, very Universal Soldier was even shot on the scene out here. So there's a lot of things that are going on out here, and a lot of things that people will experience, and they'll feel like they're stepping back into, say, the 1950s.
So is it the history side of it all? Is that what motivated you to start the race?
Yeah, I think that is really what motivated me. But we have always, my wife and I, we've always tried to raise money for, some foundations. One is the Historic Foundation. So part of the proceeds go to the Historic. And then, as well as Alzheimer's, I had a good buddy who's Mark Macy, who's suffering from Alzheimer's. And so we gave a portion of, some of our fundraising and what the entry, is involved. So I guess it was 3 years ago, Heather and I set out, and we covered, it's actually 157 miles if you go all the way to I-40. And we walked a marathon a day for 6 days. And that gives you the 157 miles. And while we were out there walking, I told her, I said, why hasn't anybody done a race out here? There are these mom and pop shops, and it's, literally like stepping back into diners, and there's jukeboxes and all sorts of things, old cars. That's what it's all about. So it's like deja vu. Oh my goodness. So that's what really motivated us and got us turned on to it. And lo and behold, this was just a mere 8 months later, we put on the first race, which was 2 years ago.
Wow. That's fantastic. Just so clarification for me, you in the introduction, I mentioned that the race is 140 miles.
Right.
And you mentioned 157 just now, but the race itself is 140 miles, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It starts at Seligman, whereas we went a little bit past that to cover as much of the stretch, the unbroken stretch that still exists. Awesome. But it's so convenient because that's the home of, Route 66 right there in Seligman. And that's where Angel lives. And so, it just worked out perfectly for us.
That's cool.
It's so neat. And I'm sure that everybody listening right now is like intrigued, right? Because how could you not be hearing that story, hearing the history? Like even you said cars, right? It immediately kind of gives you a visual of what to think of. Mm-hmm. I would assume that it's all on road, right? A lot of, and I'll put it this way: a lot of the races that we've covered, can be trail. We ask questions like, "Hey, what do the aid stations look like?" and those types of things. This race is a little bit different. So why don't you kind of help us understand, or help the listeners understand, how does the format work? We did another race recap that's similar, but let's talk about how this one's unique in terms of what does a runner need to know when they show up on race day.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I think there's a few people that would relate to say the Badwater race or the Keys 100, and it's similar to that format where you have the solo runners who have to bring a couple of crew people, and they're responsible for taking care of their runner. So there's that format, and they have to run, of course, the entire 140 miles. And we like it to keep it very, very simple. There's really no race requirement as far as, some sort of, having to do 50 milers or anything like that. In fact, an interesting tidbit, last year, we had one fella, his name was Jace. He came out. He was a firefighter, and he decided he wanted to do the race. And he brought his brothers and mother and father, and they were the crew. And he had never run a running race of any kind.
Wow.
Nor did he even run that much. And he finished in about, I think it was 42, 43 hours. So, we want to open the door for everybody. So, thus, part of our logo, it's like, it's a race for everyone. It's 140 miles of history. That's part of the logo, and it's really true. We invite everybody. I can remember when I was out there doing some races, and I really had no business doing them, but I finished them anyhow. It's kind of like that.
Said so humbly.
Yeah, he's done some tough ones. Quite a few of them.
So, and that's the one I had come to mind. We've talked to Chris Kosman a couple of times, but the one specifically that we covered was Badwater Salton Sea, and very similar type, right? Where you have to have a crew that comes along. And so you mentioned solo runners. You can also do this as a relay. Mm-hmm. You send over that information. And so if you're listening, you think, man, that's long, but I would love to go out and do this as a relay team and kind of crew each other. You have that option. But if we're talking the solo, my understanding is you need a crew of at least two. So this is going to take some preparation, at least in the planning. So it sounds like anybody can do it, but you've got a long kind of list of rules and information, and people really want to dig into that and understand what they're getting themselves into, because that part of it's important. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so what they need is an appropriate vehicle, and it can be something, vans work real well, or an SUV or something like that. So the crew just has to be very in tune to what their runner needs, and they can stop as often. It's a wide road. It's got good shoulders in probably 95% of the places, so it's easily accessible. So, and as far as the time of the year, it starts on November 8th. Here in Arizona, it's going to be a little bit chilly at the start. It's going to be 40 degrees. It'll get up to maybe 70 or 80 by the time you hit Topock 66. It's a downhill course, so you're going to, drop about 3,000 feet. So there's not that much crewing takes place. And so what we encourage is for everybody to come out and just have a blast, have a good time. The crew actually just love it out here because they can stop at these little mom and pop places and see different things. There's Grand Canyon caverns where they can go in before or after and do a little tour or something, and go down into these caverns that are 150 feet deep, and caverns that are as big as a football field. So there's all sorts of things that are out here in Arizona for them to see. So I guess the bottom line is, the crew doesn't really have to do that much other than making sure that they keep, their runner hydrated, which isn't that difficult because of the temperatures, and fed, and, so on. Now, as far as the relay that you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning that, you can do the 140 miles with 3 people all the way up to 6 people. And what they do is just crew each other. And they can trade off. They can run, even if they just want to run a mile, and then somebody else runs 50 miles. It's up to them, entirely up to them, to do it any way they want to. So it makes it very, very user friendly. And the nice thing about this is everybody is on board. Everybody out there on Route 66 knows that they're coming through, and so they open the doors. Some of them stay up late. Some of them stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning to greet the runners and stuff out there, and make sure that they can buy things at their little store, and replenish their supplies and things like that. So it is very, very unique.
So I have a question, and it's something I really wasn't sure of from the website either, but do you have like checkpoints along the way? So I know you don't have aid stations. Are there checkpoints where you keep up with the runners to kind of see how they're progressing through, and there's an expectation of even a cutoff at some point?
Yeah, so there's really no cutoff, but at the end, because I have seen runners, come back from the dead, including myself.
Sure.
So, you can get somebody that's way behind it, and you'd think it's impossible for them to finish, and nobody knows but that runner. So the cutoff is just at the end, but we do have checkpoints. One is at about 37 miles. One's at about 97 miles in Kingman. The first one's at a reservation, or excuse me, yeah, an Indian reservation. So, and they're passing through there, which is called Peach Springs, and then they go through Kingman, and that's another checkpoint. Then they go through the little town of Oatman, which is the third one, and there's about a marathon left. So what is that, about 114 miles, 15 miles, something like that? And that's the little sort of old West town that has burros walking up and down the streets, and they have gunfights and, all sorts of things going on. So there are 3 checkpoints along the way that kind of keeps runners on track, and we give each runner a tracker so we know exactly where they're at. People can follow along, and if something is needed, or if we can see if they're in trouble, and we'll send somebody out to go help them.
That's great.
Yeah, and just one more follow-up, and now it's just curiosity, and I'm not sure, but like at the checkpoints, is it a medical checkpoint, or is it just like a place that you're just tracking to see that they've come through?
Yep, it's just strictly tracking.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it could be. We're just kind of really settling in and getting a feel for everything.
Hmm.
So it's been going on 2 years. It's going on its third year. And probably next year, what we're going to do is open it up to a marathon. And we can probably even do some other distances too, because from Seligman to the Grand Canyon Caverns, which, is an extraordinary little place too, is exactly a marathon. So we'll probably open it up over the years and just keep expanding it.
One of the things that I love so much about this is, if you've been in this, most of us will figure out, okay, how do I disguise this as a family vacation, right? So that I can sign up for my race and sure, it's going to be a great time. This is like one of the first races I've heard of. I was like, this is actually a great thing for the entire family. And not only because of where you're going to see, I mean, but also the things that you're mentioning along the way. I'm just like, I'm thinking about, I'm like, my kids would
Right.
love that. There's sounds like there's entertainment built in, there's things for them to see, and not just fun things, but the history and the richness of, obviously the things that you're passionate about, but things I want my kids and family to experience that unfortunately a lot of, the country probably just hasn't or won't.
Mhm.
So I love that aspect.
I literally circled the dates again because I thought that's a good reason for me to get out there, and I can just convince my family to go. This is perfect.
Go see Route 66. Um, One of the things that you mentioned is obviously it's downhill, it's road, you've got support, it's for anybody. Is there anything though that you have seen or that you would want somebody listening to know? Is there anything that people tend to underestimate about this race?
Well, it's actually the course itself.
Mhm.
You say it's all downhill, but take, for instance, they have to go over Seligman Pass, which isn't that big of a deal. It's probably about a 1,400 foot climb over the course of maybe, 4 miles or so. And, once again, I'm going to dip into the history of it because back when you didn't have fuel pumps and things like that, you had Model A's or Model T's in particular. People would have to, if they were crossing that, and it's the same route, when they had to go over the pass, what they do is they back up over it because they couldn't get fuel to the carburetor if they went up forward. So they had to back up so it was gravity fed. So little things like that. So yeah, it's I've had people finish, and there are people who have done bad water, and they'll say, "God, this isn't much easier than bad water. It's 5 miles more and stuff like that." And they say, this is a lot tougher than I thought it would be. And I think to myself, well, it is 140 miles any way you slice it.
So true.
It's a lot. Well, I was going to say that too, because I was like, well, it sounds like it's just a stroll in the park, right? It's like, we're going to go out there and just hang out, see all these great little sights. We're just going to supposedly keep moving down the road. No big deal. But obviously, you have people who don't finish. Like, there are people who don't make the cutoff at the very end. They don't cover the distance, 140 miles in 60 hours. What are some of the things that actually knock them out of the race?
I think it was probably more than anything, they underestimated what their hydration.
Hmm.
Some of them had stomach problems, things like that. Some of them had cramping. Some people had problems with the altitude because here you come down to the Colorado River, which is maybe 1,500 feet or, over 1,000 feet. But when you start, you're starting just outside of Flagstaff, about 60 miles. So you're a mile high when you start. So the altitude can actually affect their breathing and things like that. So, I'm not saying that you have to like acclimate for it or anything like that, but it might pay. Some people go out a little bit too strong
Hmm.
and then they pay for it. So, those are just some of the things. We haven't had any difficulties like with the crew. I mean, the crews just love it so much. It's like at times I think they just forget that they've got a runner out there. So anyhow, but they've always, gotten along and everything. So you don't hear about these horror stories because there's not the pressures of, like this extraordinary time limit or anything like that. We just want to see people finish it.
And one thing I'll say too, for everybody listening, what that sound is. You hearing that
It's
feedback?
an echo.
Okay. For everybody listening, you guys have so much incredible information on the website. And so I mentioned kind of it's the rules, but I read through that and I was like, this is written or has input from a guy that's run across the country, right? Because you've got your vehicle signage and different things. And you've also got information for the crew and things to see. And so I just think you've set people up so well to, if they, do what they should and go read the information. This sounds like it just has the potential to be such an incredible experience for the runner and for the crew. You mentioned it's in November. I'm assuming anybody out in Arizona, to get used to that elevation, all they got to do is some of that heat training, right? If you're in Phoenix, just run outside and hopefully by November, you'll be all good for that little bit of elevation you got, the poor man's heat training. Let's talk registration real quick. So you mentioned there's no qualifiers or anything like that. Do people need to understand, do you anticipate selling out? I know registration's open. Anything about the registration process itself?
No, it's pretty straightforward. You just go to, Ultra sign up and, you'll see our race there. So it's very straightforward. It's simplistic in that you don't have to submit a bunch of stuff. Sure, we want to know something about you. And if people don't provide it, we ask them a few questions just to get to know them more than anything. But we try and guide them through that process, and it's fairly simplistic. Sure, we're still trying to find our way through all of, that stuff. But it's very simplistic. And the other thing is what's another thing that's very unique about this race. I call it an Indy style race start, where the first mile you have to stick together, the whole group of starters for that first mile. We have a few classic cars that are pacing everybody out, but they do 4 miles an hour. They have to get together and talk and just kind of mix it up so they get to know each other. And then after that first mile, it's off to the races. So it's very, very unique in that. So there's that. And then the person who wins it gets the Andy Payne Cup. And Andy Payne was the one who won the Bunyan Derbies in 1928. So my wife and I, Heather, we went online and found a cup. And it looks a lot like the Stanley Cup, only it's 100 years old. And so we found this, had it engraved with everything that's needed, and it's a traveling trophy where you only get to keep it for a year. Sure, you get, another prize, for being first, but it's passed on to the next person who wins it. So, that's another thing that's just kind of unique that, I thought was a good way to honor people who had done it. And then, of course, your name just is on the cup as you go down through the years.
It's a lot of nice. Sorry, it may be me. It's a lot of nice touches that you have going on with the race and everything. Apologies for the feedback that may be coming through, but it's fantastic. Some of the things I think the elements you have. That race start where you have for the first mile, you said you called it the Indy style, which is kind of like a NASCAR kind of a race car type format where you've got these pace cars setting everybody's speed at a 4 mile per hour clip, so 15 minute miles. I know the race will be going on for a couple of years. Is there a capacity that a certain number of runners that you will cap out at to keep that grouping, or like how many runners are you looking at that you think you can hold on this race?
Well, what we're trying to do, our permit is for up to 100 runners, but we don't want to have for this next year more than about 25 solo runners. If it happens, we can probably manage it. Plus about 25 teams. We just don't want it to get too big and too out of hand. We want it to be very intimate. I do the first mile with all of the people, and I try and visit with each one of them, at least say hello and who I am and so on. And of course, they get to meet us, when we're doing the race, pre-race registration and things like that, and picking up their bags and things. But it's very, very intimate. So I'll go out and check on each runner as they're out there. I try not to neglect anybody in this race while it's happening.
Um, and just it seems like all the little things that you've thought about from an experience standpoint. Obviously, everything that you've done, I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to say, "Wow, I really valued that," about these
Right.
different things. And so you mentioned registration. I will say you guys were so generous, and so if you're listening, you're like, "Yes, I want to do this." We'll put this in the notes as well. But you've given us a code for 10% discounts. If you're listening, it is UR as in ultra running, and then guys 10. So UR guys 10. You can put that in. I'll just sign up and get the 10%. We'll put it in
only through the end of March.
Through the end of March. Correct. So,
and I'm going to just jump in on that same thing. So you mentioned 25 solo runners and 25 relay teams roughly to kind of keep the number of people down. I actually like that idea of maintaining the intimacy that you're looking to strive there. I think it's a really cool feel to that. Is the race currently sold out?
No, it's not sold out.
Perfect. So the reason I'm asking that is because if people are listening and it's interesting, like I'm fascinated by the race just by talking to you, and I feel like I got to go figure out how to talk to my wife about this right now. But if somebody's listening and they're interested in doing it, then use the code. Don't use the code. I mean, one way or the other, it's great if they do, but it's because it's a benefit to them. But there's only so many slots. And so if you're interested in doing it this year, this would be the time to go ahead and get in while you can. And so it is a fantastic sounding experience that you're creating, not just a race, but like the entire experience for a runner, but the crew. And we've talked about races that we host as well. There is an element that I think as a race director that you want to pay attention to the crew. Like, how do you make the experience good for the crew, and what can you do to benefit them, because they are sacrificing their time as well. And so I really appreciate the focus that you have on the website, what ideas that the crew can do, in that direction, because that is a piece that, as a runner, I'm selfish because I'm dragging my family out there. But if I can create this type of opportunity for them to kind of get something out of it too, then yes, I feel less guilty, sure. But also they enjoy it.
Yeah,
they love to be supportive anyway of me, but it gets something as well for them, as they aren't just pining away, sitting by the side of a trail necessarily waiting on me, right? They've got something they can do too. So I like that for a lot of reasons on this race.
100%.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I'm sitting down here in Lake Havasu. So we're down here a good portion of the year. Lake Havasu is really only about 30 miles from the finish. And that's where the London Bridge is. You have boating, you have, just about everything there's ballooning, there's a balloon festival here. There's just about anything and everything. So people usually, they'll either go to Needles, but preferably, we like to see them here in Lake Havasu for the kids and their family and stuff, and they can make it a family affair before or after.
And I grew up in Southern California. Lake Havasu is fantastic. The Arizona weather that time of year is fantastic. And so there's just so much good about this race. I'm sure we could continue to talk about it, all night.
Sure.
But I do want to respect your time. Before we go, though, I have a question for you, because obviously this means a lot to you. But what does it mean to you to have these runners show up, especially coming from different areas, to run this race?
Well, it's like I feel like it's my personal contribution to the sport to, respect the runners no matter what level they're at. And you guys, talk about it a lot, entry level runners and things like that. And I'm all about that. The human mind can go anywhere, and their feet will go along with it as long as they can think it. So it means a lot to me to just have people come out here and do their race. It's not just me. It's like you guys. It's like you're talking about, these are the races that we represent. And, I'm just, a fragment of that, with just a sliver of that with Route 66. And so having people come in and actually do the race and appreciate it and really get it, what it's all about. Incidentally, people who come out here and visit Route 66, half of them are from out of the country. It is so well known in Europe and other countries. I mean, people are kind of missing out in a way, but the ones who come out here and do it, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this existed.
So good. Well, like I said, we want to respect your time. I think that was the perfect way to wrap up, to see the passion coming through. I'm very intrigued. I would guarantee pretty much that anybody who's listening sounds like just an incredible opportunity. I'll say this again, if it's your first time, just thank you for taking time. If you're finding the value, do all the stuff, right? Subscribe, tell your friends, primarily tell your friends. That's really what we want, because that's how we grow. But Marshall, our motto is just show up. And it seems like this is a just incredible race, both for the crew and for the runner, to show up out at Route 66, soak in the experiences and have a great time. And also on top of that, it's just been such an honor to talk with you, to spend this time with you. And thank you not only for this race, but for everything that you do for the sport.
Well, and thank you guys. It goes without saying, it's likewise with all that you're saying, ditto. You guys do so much for the sport, so I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we will make sure that all the information gets in the notes. And look, you're all family. So
sign up for the race.
You are guys 10. But outside of that, we will talk soon and cut.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out our full lineup of podcast episodes that are designed to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey.
So be sure to check the links below, and you can visit our website at theultrarunningsguys.com or download your episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, when in doubt, just show up.
See ya.